Hello there, you beautiful people. Now, although each of the Linux commands are very powerful on their own, the true power of the Linux command line comes from our ability to chain these commands together to build what are known as command pipelines. Now, each Linux command is designed to do one thing and do it incredibly well. So, by being able to combine together loads of powerful and feature-rich building blocks, you can create very powerful workflows and pipelines without much work at all. But in order to chain the commands together and create these powerful workflows, these pipelines, we need to understand a bit better how Linux commands actually take input and give output so that we can link the outputs and inputs together. So in this video, you're going to learn about the different ways that a command can take input and give output. And by the end, you'll be able to understand the different ways that data can flow into and out of a command, and you'll be ready to connect these commands, these data flows together to build powerful Linux pipelines. This is going to be an absolutely revolutionary time for your Linux abilities, because we're going to step up from taking just one command and learning about it to actually learn how to chain multiple commands together. So I hope you're very, very excited. Let's go ahead and jump right into it. So as you learned earlier, each command is basically its own computer program. Now, a computer program is simply an automated way to take inputs, process them, and give outputs. So here's a diagram that shows you the different ways that a command can take inputs and give outputs. Now, you can see that a general Linux command can take input from two places and will output to two other places, making a total of 4 possible ways to get data into and out of a conventional Linux command. So the inputs are command arguments and standard input, and the outputs are standard output and standard error. You can see that 3 of these are indicated by the yellow dashed arrows and are examples of something called a standard data stream. You can tell this from their names because they all start with the word standard. So you've got standard input, standard output, and standard error, and they're all standard data streams. Whereas the command line arguments have a solid blue arrow and aren't a standard data stream. So in this video, I'm going to explain to you what the different input or output options are, and you'll also learn what is special about a standard data stream and how these data streams can be used to connect commands together. So let's jump over to Ubuntu and see all this stuff in real time. Okay, so for this discussion, it makes more sense to start with the outputs, so let's start there. Now, when a command has run successfully, the primary way that the data is outputted from the command is on the channel called standard output. Now, standard output is something called a standard data stream. Now, just like a stream of water, data streams start somewhere and they end somewhere. So where does standard output lead? Well, by default, standard output will lead to your terminal. So that's why when we type commands, the output of the command appears on the screen. So for example, let's take the date command. If we type date and press enter, when we tell the date command to run, the output will be sent from the date command and flow down the standard output stream, which by default is connected to our terminal screen. Therefore, we see the date appear below our command. Okay, so that's pretty cool, but I want to plant a little seed in your mind for us to come back to later. Now, remember how I said that by default, the standard output of a command comes to the terminal? Well, the amazing thing about output data streams is that you can redirect where they go using a process imaginatively called redirection. So just like redirecting a pipe will change where water flows, redirecting a data stream will change where the data goes. Okay, so hopefully that seed has been planted and we'll come back to it in a moment. Now, the second type of output is something called standard error. So when a command gives an error message or a log message or something like that, anything that isn't the primary output of the command, that is outputted into the stream known as standard error. This helps keep useful output and log or error information separate. So for example, let's take the date command again. If I make the date command fail by giving it some invalid command argument like this, okay, and then I press enter, you'll see that we get an error message and it says invalid date, blah, 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 blah. Okay, now because it's an error message, it was sent down the standard error stream. And because the error message arrived at our terminal screen, we can see that the standard error is also automatically connected to our terminal, just like standard output is. But again, because standard error is a data stream, it can be redirected wherever we wish. So now that we understand that standard output is where the main output for the commands go, and that standard error is where the error and log messages for the command go, and that both of those are by default connected to the terminal, Let's now turn our attention to inputs. As mentioned, there are also two ways for a command to get input. The first we will discuss is another type of standard data stream, which, as you can guess, is called standard input. Now, standard input is by default connected to the keyboard. So to demonstrate this, I will introduce a new command called cat. Now, we're going to discuss cat in a later section, but I'll just use it now to explain the concept of standard input. If we take a look at the man page for cat, so we type man cat, okay, we see in its description section that if cat is not given any, if it's not given any command line arguments, that's it, cat will read from standard input. So if no file is given, then it'll read from standard input, okay? So let's do that. If I just type cat and don't give it any other form of input, we can see that the terminal kind of just hangs there. But if I start typing and I type hello and press enter, we see that the text is read from our keyboard, i.e. from standard input, and then cat processes it and outputs the results to standard output. Now, because standard output is by default attached to our terminal, we see the output appear right in our terminal. Okay, that's pretty awesome. Now, because standard input is a data stream, it can be redirected as well. That means we can tell a command where it should read data from. Now, this could be a file where we already have some pre-configured input, or more powerfully, it could be another data stream. Now, it's this ability for data streams to connect together that makes them so powerful. You can simply pass the standard output stream from one command to the standard input stream of another, then pass the standard output stream of that second command to the standard input stream of the third command, and so on until you build up a very powerful pipeline. Now, connecting outputs to inputs in this way is known as piping together commands, and is an incredibly important concept in Linux, as it's what makes working with the command line so powerful and effective, as you will see in coming videos. Now, the final type of input is command line arguments. Now, we've already actually seen command line arguments in action already. For example, when studying the command structure previously, we took a look at the cal command, and we saw, by the way, I'm just going to press Control and C to cancel this, Control and C, and that cancels it, and press Control and L to clear the screen. So when we were using the cal command, we saw something like cal 12 2017, which will allow us to see the calendar for December 2017. And the numbers 12 and 2017 were command line arguments, and you can tell that because they were added on the command line as an input to the command. We also made the command more advanced, like this, if you remember. We had cal, gave it the capital A option, gave that option an input, gave the capital B option, gave that option its own input, and then gave the cal command two other inputs. Okay, so it was quite complicated, and it showed us the calendar for December 2017 with 1 month after and 1 month before. Now, the A and B options have their own command line arguments. Here, the A option has the command line argument, which is number 1, and B also has a command line argument of the number 1. And on top of those, the overall cal command has 12 and 2017 as its own command line arguments. Okay, so there's one argument for the A option, one argument for the B option, and 2 arguments for the overall cal command. Now, the difference between command line arguments and data streams is that data streams can flow. They can be redirected and piped together. Command line arguments only associate with the command or option that they're dealing with at the moment. Now, there are commands such as the xargs command that allow you to blur the lines a little bit between data streams and command line arguments, but in general, the difference is that data streams can flow and be piped together, but command line arguments are more static and still. There is one other key difference to keep in mind, though, in that not all commands accept standard input. For example, the echo command doesn't accept standard input, but pretty much every command can accept command line arguments. And if you want to know whether a command can actually accept standard input, just check its man page, and if it's not there, just assume that it can't. Awesome! So in this video, you've learned some incredibly important concepts. As a quick recap, we learned that there are 2 ways to get data into commands and 2 ways to get data out. The ways in are standard input and command line arguments, and the ways out are standard output and standard error. Now, the 3 ways that start with the word standard are examples of standard data streams. We mentioned that standard output is where the outputted data for a command goes, and that standard error is where the error and log messages for a command goes. And by default, standard output and standard error are attached to your terminal, but this can be changed. You also learned about standard input. Now, standard input by default is attached to your keyboard and is also a data stream, which means it can take data from other places too, using something called redirection. That's right, data streams can be redirected from their default locations to wherever you wish using a process called redirection. We also mentioned that you can actually connect the output streams of one command to the standard input of another using a method called piping. Now, piping and redirection are incredibly powerful abilities that Linux gives us, and being able to use them effectively will basically give you superpowers for interacting with your computer in ways that you never thought possible. And I hope that you're super excited, because piping and redirection are going to be the topic of the next few lectures. So if you want to gain superpowers, I'll see you in the next video.